Well, thank you so much for this introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. It's my second lecture here. I can't really remember when the first one was. I think it was in 2004. And now, of course, a lot of things happened, and I'm happy to show what came out after, after a couple of years of persistent working and trying to get work, also with a team that developed, and also to continue to somehow develop a certain concern and realization of these investigations into space. But before I go ahead and talk about this, I really would like to thank the CCA and SF MoMA for this invitation, specifically also for combining this with the exhibition at SF MoMA that we prepared for the last, 2-3 years. And it's really quite touching that something like this can become true or becomes reality, especially now with these times where everything becomes quite complicated. And in case you need an architect for a larger lecture hall, you know where to go. Sorry for the ones who have to be outside, but I'll try to show a lot of images, so it should be a little entertaining. The first competition I won in 1998, quite as a solitary moment. I started teaching, and it was my 10th competition. I never won any prize or any placement before, and I decided if that's not a way to get work, then I should find something else. And thank God, or some magic moment happened, and the competition became ours, and that's when the office started. This was 98, and so in a way it's a kind of a 10-year anniversary lecture. This was in December 98, and now it's kind of 10 years later. And also there's a book that just came out, a monograph that will be hopefully available at the opening on Thursday. So in a way it's kind of a little jubilee moment. I'd like to show work today that goes, as Ayla mentioned, from small scale to urban intervention. It kind of happened that discipline doesn't really become a big issue anymore, although in the beginning we were quite often confronted with is this architecture, is this art, is this design? I think by now I don't really care anymore. It's more about kind of the settings or the moments where things get shown, what the different critiques are, the different responses, the discussions that happen about around them. And I think that's quite enriching. And also these kind of questions seem to disappear slowly, seeing that there is actually a connection between these different fields. Or let's say there's a certain concern that just gets articulated in different contexts. So architecture somehow moved away from being just a stable background for us to become an activator, something that becomes a participant in everyday life. It starts to form certain occupation patterns. It starts to provoke new forms of program. And it somehow moves more towards being a catalyst for our everyday environment rather than being a stable neutral background. So this change of perception and also occupation, I think, is what concerns us. Of course, this means we have to closely look at what are the new technologies at hand, what are the different medias that now play a role in production of space, and the interface or the kind of the feedback that we get from our spatial environments, the forms of new media logistics that came with the computer technology, and so forth. And quite often, when we start designing the surface, like a writer who has a white piece of paper and starts to create a certain story, an argument, a comment to our culture, architecture I see is very similar to that. And the surface then becomes a starting point in our investigations from issues of transparency, haptic or sensorial questions, of course the structure and the construction behind it, the information value of surfaces, the question in front and behind, and of course before and after. I would like to mention 2-3 people who are really crucial from the very beginning for the office. Of course now it's a whole team of about 17 people, plus a whole network of specialists, consultants, helpers, critical commentators, something like that, friends. And the 2 people from the very beginning are Sebastian Fink and Andre Santer. And I would also like to mention Wilco Hoffmann, who is here in the audience, who was in charge of the exhibition at SF MoMA. And it's great to know that there are a couple of people who really develop the work together in a very kind of friendly, family-style even atmosphere. So in the beginning, I think the question was about how can we argue, how we create things, where does form come from, how do we develop a certain language that seems to express what we would like to say. So from a question like where does form come from, I think now after 10 years there's a certain catalog that starts to cross over and inform each other to questions: what can form do? What are the performative aspects? What are the generative aspects of form? So it's more like the effect rather than the origin that is the interest. So this is all kind of the little pre-talk, and I would like to start with a couple of examples of small investigations, installation works, to then show how certain ideas that are tested in these small scale environments, how they become then somehow translated also in later larger architectural proposals. And I think I'll focus then in the end on the Seville project, because that's somehow the most complex project that brings together quite a lot of the research that we did before. So here the first, is this too bright here for the images? Is that okay? Yeah. The first set of projects are dealing with temperature-sensitive paint. And here you see traces of warmth, either warmth from objects of daily use, like the cups that you saw before, or human body temperature. So it's kind of the temperature landscape of your body that gets kind of exposed, something invisible that gets exposed when you touch surfaces. So these were like small-scale objects, and it became one environment at one point at Henry Urbach's gallery in New York. This is in 2005, where for the first time it really became an all-inclusive environment. It was a reference to an exhibition that Frederick Kiesler designed for the Hugo Gallery in New York, an exhibition that was called Blood Flames in 45 or 47, which showed surrealist work. But the work itself, and I should have brought a picture, is actually paintings and sculptural work that were covered by wood planks. The whole thing was kind of painted in an overall black, amorph, super graphic, and there were ropes that you would have to tear to open up the wood planks to see the artwork. So there was an interaction between the visitor and the artwork, and only if you became kind of active as the visitor, there was something to see. Similar to that, but with a new kind of spin with new materials. The surfaces that are darker are temperature-sensitive paint surfaces, and so you would only, it was a portrait show actually, so you would only see something when you would touch the walls with your face or with your hands. You would sit down and you see some of the traces here. In a larger context, and this was kind of based on the exhibition at Henry Urbach Architecture Gallery, this was at the Vitra Museum in Rhein am Rhein in southern Germany, where we were asked, 8 designers or architects were asked to rethink the idea of a normal house, and so we were given the kitchen dining area, which actually happens here in the front in the museum, and we took it into the exhibition space and also introduced different new technologies. In this case, we had built-in hot wires that would heat up and cool down, and therefore we would create temporary ornament that you would see with these lines. Then, of course, you have the stains and the change of colors through food and liquid, and then, of course, the imprints of your hands. We used a somehow site-specific architectural language. This is in the Frank Gehry building. I'm sure everybody knows it. It's this kind of wide, fragmented thing. And we took that to the interior, built up even more fragmented relief, and overlaid it with this super graphic that would, again, erase these definitions between floor, wall, and ceiling. So I don't know how good you can see it from the back, but there are some areas where you have this built-in white lines, which would at some point appear and then disappear, and again, this would happen also on seating areas. All this started with a simple furniture piece for Archilab in 2001 as objects, but the first exhibitions were actually back in 96 and 97. Heat seat, which again shows very playful the idea that there is no such thing as an innocent architectural surface anymore. Wherever we go and wherever we move, we leave certain traces, and might expose something that's carefully hidden, or playfully see that we start to interface or interact with our environment. So if the first piece was about new materials and what the potential of these new materials are for rethinking our context, this one now is more of a traditional material and the potential to discover new qualities. This is for Bisazza, an Italian glass mosaic company, and it's glass mosaic on a foam body, a foam form. I was fascinated by when you get these glass mosaic tiles, when they come on paper or on textiles, that they have this nice, elastic, flexible quality. And we wanted to keep that quality also when it goes further in kind of applications. In this case, we were asked by Style Park to work with Bisazza on a launch for a design event in Berlin. And from then on, it developed more and more into like a real furniture piece. But what you see when you only look at them is these very kind of solid, maybe even cold-looking pieces. But as soon as you sit down, they become welcoming and quite soft. Another thing is old material, but with new applications. Linoleum, again for Style Park, a launch for the UIA World Architecture Congress in Berlin in 2001, where this was for the first time actually where we used computer drawings to send them directly to the carpenter, and they just basically cut it out and produce these forms. So now this is so standard, but it was quite a refreshing moment. Then specifically also because the way of how you have to detail, how much of that communication goes between you and the carpenter, all seem to be completely new and have to be negotiated in a new way. In this case, it was an information lounge and info point for Style Park at the very center of the UIA Congress. And we worked with strips of like 60 centimeters and programmed all the different needs that were necessary, from internet terminals to storage areas to projection walls, a bar, and that's somehow how this whole landscape happened. It was not meant to be only used in one way, but you could completely like start to occupy it in your own manner. So everything, all the program was kind of sucked in and became part of that landscape. And this is 10 years later, more or less. So this is 6 years later, where in a similar strategy, the swelling of the ground becomes somehow a volume to house program. In this case, it's a science park in Denmark called Dantas Universe. And it's a park that was there maybe 1 or 2 years earlier, and it became so successful that they started to grow and expand also more into the winter months with like enclosed areas. More or less it's a kind of an open door, outdoor science park to introduce new technology and materials and science to children. So this in this case, we kind of compressed the landscape, made it into this volume, and all the extra spaces that are kind of created we could use for the mechanical equipment. So we don't have anything on the roof, and of course sometimes you also get this kind of volume inside. Since it was a black box, but we still felt there should be some kind of a transparency, an understanding outside what is happening inside, we created these overhangs on the ends to maybe have, if there's a Formula 1 car race, a race car show inside, we could have one exposed outside or a projection or something. Unfortunately, this is not used in this way until now. The first show that's now up is called Bitlands, and it's a show that talks about digital technology. You could scan in your face, play with pixels, record your voice, play with different filters and so forth. There's an auditorium inside. It's also very kind of a pedagogical place. It's based off a whole network of schools around that area. So this is like one of the large, long walls. The same happens on the other side, and they're built in projectors, so they would actually shoot imagery onto each other, which was generated by all these kind of large kind of playful computers where you could start to do all these experiments. This is the restaurant. Also the restaurant, the roof is in bitumen. It's very nice, kind of cheap way to create very elegant surfaces. It's mostly just used as a roofing material, but in Denmark they have a really beautiful building culture where this becomes also possible to use it in facades. And then the sides are in alucobond. And the last surface obsession I have are these data protection patterns. I collect them since about 1994, and I discovered them while I was asked to participate in an exhibition in Chicago which was called Disappeared. It was about, I was asked to do a housewarming installation, which are these temperature-sensitive paints in the beginning, and I wanted to add something to this housewarming idea. So I thought a guest book actually is perfect because it basically becomes a record of all the guests that would come to a housewarming. And I wanted to do, or the book was developed as a whole print, like a completely printed book with temperature-sensitive paint, but with these patterns. So if you would write your comment as a guest, you could not really see it. You would only see that something is written, but you could only read it when you touched the paper and the pattern disappeared. The pattern came back when the page cooled off. So it's kind of the same thing. You're only a guest because you're a guest, you come and you leave. So the writing actually came or appeared and disappeared again. So that's when I discovered this whole kind of magic world of these patterns, and I'm collecting them now for maybe the last 14, 15 years. And it's quite interesting. I think I have about 300 to 400 different patterns, and I should start to archive them slowly because they become such a fundamental source for the work. But they somehow also cover their own history. The oldest source I found was a printer in Berlin, and they had a catalog from 1914 where they offered lead stencils with these patterns. And my assumption is that with the advent of carbon paper, where you could write original and copy at the same time, certain information had to be blocked or blurred, and that's when these patterns were actually printed on these forms, because the one who delivers something doesn't need to know how expensive the object is that he delivers, for example. So these patterns are still in play, maybe the last ornament in our information age that's still visible before everything moves into the digital era. So they appear now in small-scale installations like these bed sheets, where, again, printed with temperature-sensitive paint. It becomes kind of a discourse, if you like, between the white modernist surface and ornament, hiding stains through patterns, camouflaging, certain traces. Churchill likes to call it a perfect anagram, bedroom and boredom. Basically, your own shadow follows you, something like that. So it becomes a whole, multiple reading element that now appears over and over in different scales and in different articulations, sometimes very direct as found pattern translated into an architectural surface, like this is the carpet of our first project, a town hall outside of Stuttgart, or as a perforated metal screen for the letterboxes in the same town hall. But then when we jump to a larger scale, it might become a facade, again with this idea of perforation, where we occupy that very kind of small layer of 50 centimeters to 1 meter, where we still have a certain flexibility in an office space, and start from there towards the outside and towards the inside. So in this case, it's an office building on the waterfront in Hamburg that we finished about 1.5 years ago. And we introduced, because it's on a beautiful site where you can look at the water, which is the inner lake of Hamburg and a little park in front of it, where we introduced these kind of winter gardens in the facade where you can actually walk in, put in a chair, read something, maybe have a cigarette. Each rental unit, which is, and there are 3 on each floor, would have one of these special moments. And you could actually then place either a meeting room or the boss room or maybe a communal space, something special within this very generic office floor behind these things. So that's one moment where you can actually walk into that facade layer. But then also this idea of this perforation and the relief gets translated into the structural system. We have a prefabricated concrete ceiling where you see these kind of reliefs, and it goes further into the separation walls, for example, into the furniture. This is an advertising agency now who occupies about 3/4 of the building. It goes into, again, furniture. This is the meeting room. Even into the mosaics, the little kind of round mosaics that we use in the staircase. So it also becomes part of a material selection. And then when we walk outside, these ideas of the special moments, the special kind of meeting areas in the building become part of the design of the park. And it was somehow a deal between the city and the client, who was allowed to build a little bit more square meters, and therefore he was asked to actually pay for the remodeling of the park, which was a completely rundown green area. So what we did was kind of copying these elevated or exposed areas and made them into special moments within that green field as picnic areas, as seating areas, and so forth. Now, when we develop this perforation a little bit more three-dimensional, we might end up with something like the dining hall in Karlsruhe, Mensa Moltke, which now became even something like a sustainable prototype for public building in Germany, because due to the effect that there's a very specific, price per square meter per dining hall, and our competition entry, which luckily won, looked a little bit different than I think what they had in mind. We were quite challenged to find a way, an interesting or like a possible way to build this thing. The competition side is between an urban context of Karlsruhe and a forest in the north, and in a way the building became an ambivalent structure, being a kind of an artificial forest or a real building. We accepted the kind of the footprint, the maximum side that we could build on, as kind of the shape of the ground floor, and developed with our kitchen engineer a perfect kind of layout, because it really had to work as a machine. And it does. They asked us to prepare or to make the building for about 1,800 meals a day, and they're now doing even like 2,700 a day. So it really works perfectly within the logistics. But in order to be flexible enough to keep that relationship between the floor and the ceiling as something that we could constantly kind of readjust according to where the program would fit or how the program would fit perfectly, we developed this thing we called Nutellagram or gumgram. Basically, the floor and the ceiling became this kind of elastic relationship until we at some point froze it, because that's when the kind of the program would fit perfectly inside this thing. So this was kind of a diagram we did after the competition, just more as a reading device for how to look at this building. But these are now the articulations, the architectural articulations of that building. It became this three-dimensional skeleton. Everything is kind of built in again, like the lights are part of the structure, or the ventilation systems are part of the structure. There's this whole kind of color scheme of different greens that don't really match each other, so there's kind of a sun-like vibration in the space. And we had to be innovative in terms of the construction, because, as I mentioned before, it's not the regular construction that usually I think is the basis for this price per square meter limitations in a way. So we researched about 2-3 months how to build this, and we compared wood structure to concrete to steel, and wood always came back as the only one that actually would help us to build it. But we had to be innovative in terms of how to treat that wood to keep the look that we wanted, and also to keep a certain maintenance over time in mind, so we don't have to paint it every 2-3 years. It would actually last longer. So we developed this wood, which is we found this wood, which is this highly compressed layered wood called Kerto. It comes in sheets of 2 meter by 40 meter, and you basically can cut out any form that you like. You really have to think wood in a completely new way as a kind of a high-tech material. The spans are larger. Again, the duration is much longer. And after kind of doing this prefab fast construction, you would then come in with, there would be a company who would come and spray a 3mm polyurethane coating on it, which is still like diffusion open, and it would allow the vapor in the wood to come out. At the same time, it really becomes kind of a non-detailed building. I mean, you have to be really precise in how to detail it, but you spray it on basically on all 4 sides or all 3 sides, and it would make the building waterproof. You don't need any metal flashing anymore. So what is in a way a little bit more expensive in terms of material, it actually in the long run is really cheap in terms of maintenance. You only have to paint it maybe out of optical reasons, but you don't have to paint it to treat the wood or keep the wood alive or protect it to weather. And also you're actually free of doing all these different metal flashings and precise detailing. So it becomes this beautiful envelope of material, and we got critiqued in the beginning by architects that you cannot do that to wood. Like, how painful this is, to the honesty of construction and so forth. And it took a while, I think like 2-3 really horrible articles, and a couple of months, that people now start to understand that this is actually an interesting possibility. And it comes back now in our largest project in Seville, where in a way this was always the one. It's not because we prefer this, it's always compared with the city, with the construction companies and so forth, as the one that survived all these different equations. So this is the pergola towards the entrance, and this is the building from the main entrance view. And now, before I go into 2 other projects that I will explain a little bit more in detail, I'll just give you a little overview of what's also on the board right now. This is an exhibition for Volkswagen Autostadt in Wolfsburg. It's about sustainability and then, of course, mobility and Volkswagen at some point. But we developed also this kind of green structure developed out of this recycling triangle that then becomes part. It's an interior 1,000 square meter exhibition that we collaborate with Art & Com. They do all the interface design now. We have in this web again built in interactive media. There's all this projection, so it has to be again like a dark space, and also the attractors or the attractions have to, then the content has to change over time. Then we are also doing a housing project in the center of Jena, which is where Carl Zeiss is based, where all the optical lenses are produced more or less for most of the major cameras and lenses in the world. And what you see is this little court of 4 buildings forming a small kind of neighborhood with this connection to the market square that you'll see in this larger thing here, the larger opening. So it's basically between the oldest parts of Jena and the 19th century boulevard, and it's this combination of 4 buildings that you see here. The court view. Then we are working on the courthouse in Hasselt in Belgium, and I'm showing this somehow to also for architects. It's so painful for so many years to get finally something built that it. We are quite happy now that these things seem to find a certain resonance, and also create a curiosity that now seems to spread and also start to cross-reference from one program to the other, from one scale to the other. This one here is a courthouse in Belgium, Hasselt, that we started construction in October together with A2O Architekten and Lenzas. It's on a former industrial train station area. It's like basically next to the main train station. As it develops all over the world, that these areas actually get moved out of the city or become not really important because coal storage is not that current anymore. And this whole plan, this whole area was urban. There was an urban design development by West 8, and the competition that we won asked for the architectural articulation on that urban plan. So this is the first building on that site, and it becomes one of the major courthouses in Belgium, in this case for the Limburg area. Then we just finished a little house for 12 children who come to charity projects that's partly paid by a foundation, and then each place for the children is paid by the city of Hamburg. And it's for 12 children who come from socially dysfunctional families, and they will find a new home, or they found a new home. And I think the youngest one is basically like 2 years old, and they go up till 18 until they become adults and have to move out and find their own life. So that's also kind of a very important project, because it's quite touching, you know, how happy they were to get their own special project. It came with, you know, such pride, you know, and excitement to them. And I think it's important to also see how you can bring these kind of extra architectural moves to quite mundane program and show other people that it doesn't, like, low budget doesn't mean it has become a boring piece of architecture. This one here is an apartment we're doing in Berlin for a young couple who are based in San Francisco and in Berlin, and so it's quite exciting to see, you know, how this becomes a very special home, second home, and hopefully the more attractive one, because we really like them, and I hope they will stay more often in Berlin than in San Francisco. So this is a really nice piece of, again, just interior architecture, and these are shots. It's not done yet, it's still under construction. This is a park-in hotel in Krakow, soon to be finished. I think in about 2 months they will open, and it's our first project actually in a foreign country, but it took the longest so far. So I'm excited to see that being finished soon. This is an office building in Hamburg for the same client. We did the white building. This is on one hand next to, well, this would be on the other side, a dark brick building like the Chile House, like an expressionist you know, office complex from the 30s. But on the other side, it becomes actually the smallest house in Hamburg with 1.60 meters. It was basically where this storage building had its crane access to the water canal, which doesn't exist there anymore. So in a way, it's a very unique, special site in Hamburg. And so you see a construction picture that should be done in June this year. So now, in more length, a villa that we just finished about half a year ago outside of Stuttgart. And this is interesting now, if you think back to the Mensa, the dining hall, this kind of move towards a more three-dimensional understanding of perforations, of openings, of kind of massaging masses. Now this really starts to melt even more into each other. We started somehow with, I'll tell you the story here in a minute. We started similar to the dining hall with like basically a base and a roof, and treated the relationship between the two. The client asked us to look at their old house because they weren't so happy with it anymore. He started to build this in 84 and 1984, and with every child and with more money, and just with over time it just grew and grew and grew. You could see all the different fashions of natural stone, from travertine to gray concrete, to gray granite, to white marble, to whatever. Every balcony became a window garden. Every pool area was kind of extended and became larger. Conceptually very interesting, but aesthetically not so pleasing anymore. That's what he felt. And so even became kind of minimalist with a new garage and the landscaping. So quite interesting accumulation of 20 years of architectural thinking. So what he asked us was, in a way, come up with a new design for a house. But at the same time, I felt he was kind of very emotional about the old one, because that's where he started to build kind of the foundation for his family. This was the house for his wife and the 2 kids. So while I talked to him, I felt we have to deal something with this. It has to be something like a family archaeology. So we developed from the footprint of the house, because we had to keep some of the foundations, a part of the pool, in the ground. It's on a slope, so it would have been too expensive to take all of that out. So we actually kept the footprint of that kind of grown building as the origin of the geometry of the building. So we have this as the ground floor, which is kind of the garden floor. We duplicated it and rotated it to become the upper floor. And then, of course, both floors kind of started their own kind of dynamic. The children's rooms downstairs became bigger, larger, smaller. upstairs is the private rooms, the bedroom and the bathroom and the office and the guest room. So they became kind of massaged according to different needs. And then in between, which is now the public or semi-public area, that's where the dining room is, the living room, the kitchen, and so forth. That now became the mediator between these two levels of decretion, if you like. And that's then how the building was developed. It's outside of Stuttgart, so you're facing Marbach, which is on the other side. The German Literature Archive is there. It's a very beautiful view to kind of a medieval town silhouette. And so that's why we kind of rotated it out also from the history to have a kind of a view and a different connection to that specific or very beautiful landscape. But what you see, similar to the project before, there's a certain understanding of a continuous idea of an envelope that starts to meld different things together, that tries to break down the hierarchies of, different dimensions, also to erase certain things that look too familiar as architectural objects, maybe to create a certain estrangement or force a second look because you really have to understand what's going on. In this case, it looks so kind of white and unique. The whiteness is, I think, like 4 different materials according to the technical needs. So the roof again has a polyurethane coating, then there's stucco. We have certain polyurethane areas where the openings are. It melts down and becomes a tartan rubber floor for the outdoors. So in a way, this kind of very simple and abstract look, which sometimes even gets critiqued as this looks like a rendering, although it's built, actually comes from being very specific about erasing these details, which means in the end we have to detail even more complex than if you would just do kind of very standard detailing. So here you see the different layers of the upper floor and the lower floor and this mediator of public spaces in between. This is the floor plan where I think if you would cut where the stair is kind of vertical line, all but on the left side is existing foundation and existing walls, and what's on the right is new. Then this is the major floor, the main floor, with the entrance on the left, the central atrium space, and it's more like a flower with like 4 leaves. The living room on the bottom, then it's kind of her office and little library on the right, dining and kitchen on the top, and then the entrance area. And they became kind of separated by these cores to house certain programs, like the fireplaces or the staircase and the elevator, or the kitchen, guest bathroom, and the wardrobe. And the upper floor again becomes a little bit more complex with all different kind of separations of rooms. I'll show you some images of the interior in a second. So the entrance would be on that middle floor, which is now on the left side. So all these cantilevers basically are created through this rotation of the geometry. Now inside, this is the dining room, and there was no question about colors or even gray. They decided that gray and color, they had it, so everything had to be white or black, and they all just dress in black. They only have 4 black cars. Everything is kind of, that was fixed from the very beginning. I wouldn't have done it in white actually, but it was also nice to not have to think about this part. This is the main atrium. This is like the little office and the view outside to the old medieval town on the other side. Atrium. They were very difficult lines, so in a way I'm also happy that it's done, but I think we need these kind of special people other as lines. So this is the Marbach, the other side of the river of Neckar, the pool, and so the front part actually is old, the part in the back is new, but of course we had to do all the new kind of materials to cover it and also updated the technological parts. This is the main room, and on the right side would be the entrance. And the last image, again, how it kind of melts onto that slope. Again, what looks quite unique, as what they say, as a unique material. The structure is a concrete structure. It has I'm so fixed on polymer now. It has 4 concrete blocks up to like 80 centimeters, and everything is kind of hand sanded with like stencils and templates. The roof is actually a steel construction with a concrete border. The upper part, because she thought it should be also a little bit more biologically correct, is actually made of bricks and a wood roof. So all that is covered again behind this white skin. And if I look back, or if I would like to compare the small installations with the architectural work, there's actually a different way of starting to think about them. Mostly the smaller work starts with a material or a certain object that then starts to get explored in different directions, and also to see where the limits are. In architecture, it's the other way around. It's more about an all-inclusive environment, or let's say a certain atmosphere, that then gets slowly kind of fine-tuned and defined by finding the appropriate materials, finding the appropriate construction technologies, and so forth. So in a way, the dining hall, and I should have said earlier, so the idea of this elastic rubber-like model came back somehow through this rubber-like polyurethane skin as a material, not intentionally in the very beginning, but I think it makes a nice round to go from the conception back to the actually haptic qualities of the building. So now Seville Metropole Parasol is a competition that we won in 2004, quite just shortly after we won the Mensa Dining Hall, and it's now under construction for about 4 years, and hopefully it will be done in about 1.5 years. So it's a very complex project. The speed in the beginning was incredibly fast. Then it became slower also because of the logistics involved, the politics, but now we are like full speed again, and hopefully the structure will be done by the end of the year. But what I want to say about this project is that the intelligence, I think, lies way before we came into the whole process, because the city decided to make a competition that's only an ideas competition to take away the pressure to have to find a project that fits into the very heart of Seville. Only then afterwards, when things became more public, and I'll explain the process in a second, the city decided to move it more towards a realization project with the support of the citizens. So this is Seville, supposedly the largest medieval town center in Europe, and it's this egg-like shape that goes from top to bottom of this picture. What you see on the left side is the expo site from '92, and this was maybe the last moment of innovation or urban innovation that happened in Seville. Now the whole city goes through a complete transformation. They're building subways now. They're redoing all their plazas with like coverings. When we came there in 2004, a lot of the plazas still had really just like compressed earth. They didn't really have, or even some streets were still like, I don't know, like sand streets or like compressed sand streets. So it's quite amazing how fast the city developed in the last couple of years. So the competition side is this red spot in the center, and it's somehow like the new heart, or it will hopefully become the new heart again of the city. This was where the food market was before, and it had to move out in the 50s one part, in the 70s the other part, because the city just became too big, and the food market was too important and too complicated to reach in the center of the city. This site also is important in a very local context, because the southern half of the downtown area is somehow high developed. It has all the main institutions, the town hall, the shopping streets, the big cathedrals. The northern part was still, or is still a little bit, not dangerous, but underdeveloped. It has some scary areas, but so it's meant that this project is meant to bring this development from the south also into the northern part of downtown Seville. Of course, it should have certain national effects, competing Spanish cities, starting I think with the Bilbao effect, and then of course to attract international business and also tourism. The design went through a whole process, quite non-linear, with trial and error. We developed different technologies, different geometries. We tested them in models, and this one was always the one that came back. And we knew that it had to be somehow an object to define the space rather than to work on the periphery, since the market who was there before also was this object that actually holds that space. This was the situation for the competition. As I mentioned before, there was a food market, and I think I have pictures. Yeah, this was the situation for the competition. The competition asked for keeping the archaeology that was found after starting to build a 4-story deep parking garage, building the perimeter walls, taking out the earth, and after 6 meters they found all these Roman ruins. Actually, more or less the center of where the city started in Roman times. So that's when everything froze. There was a plan to build just a normal plaza with like a small food market, and that's when everything froze. And the idea was to rethink what is an urban space in the 21st century. How can maybe there be an icon that represents that? How can the archaeological window to the history of Seville, as this unique chance that kind of was given, how can this be preserved and also be part of that scheme? And of course bring back some of the food market functions more as a local food market, not so much as the one that kind of feeds the whole city. As you see here, the southern part was torn down in the 50s to create this end stop of a bus line that would bring you into the center of the city. The northern part then was torn down in the 70s, and again the development was about parking. All this is gone now. The whole city now will be car-free. Maybe just taxis can go in there, but that's the idea of introducing the subway, also trams, and so forth. So this was the market. As you see, it's kind of the center of the, it's kind of an object sitting there. And all the facades that happened around there were small street facades at some point, and it just ripped out basically fabric to create larger volume for this, or larger space for larger volume buildings. This was the temporary situation for about 30 years after they torn down the food market. And this was the situation when the competition was started. Then, when we won, the archaeologists somehow had to come in basically 2 months before we were allowed to do our foundations, to record everything, to take out the mosaics or the columns or whatever they found. So step by step it was going like through the site and record and preserve what's there to bring it now back into the archaeological museum. So in the first phase, and I'm telling you a little bit about the process because I think that's kind of key to why this project can happen, or was, yeah, there was a chance that this would happen then. I think nowadays with the economy in Spain being completely also collapsed, I doubt it would be built again nowadays. But in the first phase, we developed this kind of cloud to cover the space, to give some shadow, and I think the most important element that we could introduce there is actually shadow, to allow people to hang out in a square like this in summer or most of the time of the year. And then in the second phase there were about 180 entries, I think. They selected 10 projects. The first phase was completely anonymous. The second phase they selected 10 projects, and they were completely different, each of them. We all had to come to Seville, present our projects to the others, also presented in public forums to the citizens. There was feedback. There was a whole website where all the documents, all the drawings, all the texts were available to everybody. There was a guest book, and it was quite, also for us supportive to read that our project was the one that was actually most welcomed and mostly discussed in the second phase. So we put a lot of energy and also carefully looked at the comments and the critique that was articulated on the website. So the first phase we just did kind of out of interest and without going to Seville. There were some memories I had going to the expo site in '92. But then in the second phase we went back actually and double checked and compared our scheme to maybe elements that we would find on site or in the neighboring areas, to then start to fine-tune our project, but also try to articulate and argue and kind of make our project more kind of approachable also for people who are not in the architectural field and don't read really, what we are trying to do. So this is a square just next door with these huge trees, and in a way it's kind of a grown similar spatial proposal than what we did with our parasol. This is the roof of the cathedral, which somehow was one of the initial ideas. It's like this flying stone carpet over the city. And then, of course, the structure from underneath as this kind of base-defining element. And in a way, also we like to call our project the democratic, urban, open cathedral versus the closed, religious, contained cathedral of Seville. Here you see again the 4 different layers. We have the archaeology on the bottom. Then the main floor has the food market and 2-3 commercial areas. There's an elevated plaza that's again the swelling of the ground. If you think back to the UIA Style Park Lounge or even the Danfoss Universe project. And then we have these mushrooms growing up. There's a restaurant on top and a panoramic walk. Some floor plans. Maybe just to show you that we developed this grid of points which then we could somehow activate as certain programs. Sometimes it become a water puddle, sometimes a little grass area, sometimes a kiosk, sometimes a foot of a parasol, sometimes just a color change in the granite floor. The archaeology on the left side, where the areas we were not allowed to touch are shown in these beige colors, and then the selected points where we can bring down the load. So in a way, starting with the roof shape, bringing down the loads on very selected points, kind of automatically generated the sculpture quality of the project. And then here you see the restaurant floor plan, or at least the outline, with a panoramic walk. So the level is just a little bit higher than the buildings around. We had to negotiate with the cultural administration of Andalusia. The whole city is kind of UNESCO, not protected, but like in their view. I think the southern part of the downtown area is actually UNESCO protected. And so it was always about negotiating how much can it be different and how much does it have to be part of, you know, the kind of the scale and the structure of Seville. The dimensions are about 30 meters height, 150 meters long, and 75 meters wide. And in the lower plan section, you see that the structure again is like it's kind of a messy structure. Again, the structure where it needs to be steel is steel, where it needs to be concrete is concrete, and where it needs to be wood, it's wood. So all the beige part now is again this highly compressed laminated wood with polyurethane coating. We have a concrete core for elevators because of fire issues and a certain stiffness. We have steel structure for large free and dell structures and so forth. So then step by step we get closer, detail the joints, detail the geometries, look at shadow studies, like which areas of what part of time, at what time of the day could become occupied with different programs. And what makes it really difficult is that this project is partly paid for by the city and partly by a private company. So it's one of these public-private partnership projects where we now become somehow the mediator between the company who tries to do everything as cheap as possible versus the city who wants to be sure that it stays alive at least for 40 years, because that's how long the company can make profit of it before it goes back to the city. And that's of course caring about detailing and the quality of the project. So at this point it's constantly working within this triangle. The project is about 60 million euros, so 30 million are paid for by the city and the rest is paid by the company. And so it's like step by step, they also with the economy being so difficult, and they get paid by their sister company, who then slow down and they have less money to spend every month on the project. So that's how everything it's kind of a chain reaction. And the city becomes so nervous now that they say it has to be done by the end of this year, no matter what. And now they bring in people who supervise this construction site twice a week. So here again you see these metal pieces, these timber plates with this highly compressed wood layers, these machines that cut out all these different forms. Is this sound different now? It sounds like it. And what is interesting that this the move from creating a certain kind of perforated cloud, which we did in the first phase, to building the volume and having it cut like a topiary tree, allowed us to keep a certain flexibility that we still have to have these days, because the dimensions, according to technical needs, how we detail it, the certain forces that go in, still have to be constantly negotiated. So this here is the construction site about 2 years ago. Again, it shows you quite clearly the perimeter of walls and the 2 concrete cores for the elevators. This was the situation also about at Easter 2 years ago, so less than 2 years. And the project not only has its own logistical problems, you know, what has to be built first, you know, what is the whole kind of process of getting this done with the archaeologists and so forth, but of course it has to be part of a political logistic. The mayor wanted to be re-elected again, so this platform had to be up, although it didn't really make sense at that point. But he wanted to show that, you know, things go forward, and there's like a picture that he can take him in front of this thing. Just before, 2 weeks earlier, this is one of my favorite pictures, Semana Santa in Seville. So this project is actually also built into religious logistics. So there are these processions that go with these floats that go through the whole city a whole week before Easter. And so we had to take down a crane, we had to move back the construction site, so that would be the traditional route that could go through the, you know, through our construction site for this 1 week. And these beams that are there were actually important to move up the platform. You still see the steel cable, and I'll go back one image until we had these supports. This was a picture taken about 1 month later. So then comes all the other foundations and supports, and you see quite this interesting scale change between, you know, the footprints of the parasols and these small houses that were never really meant to be facades for larger buildings. So it's not like a Plaza Mayor or Plaza Real in Madrid or Barcelona, but this homogeneous, beautiful facade contains the space. It's actually the reverse thing. All different heights, all different, you know, times when they were built. Here you see the overall plaza with the Fiendel structures that span this large archaeological field. This small circle in the front, this is where the last parasol will come down. Then you have one across the street, one more on the left side, then the 2 high-rise, the 2 concrete cores. When you're up there, this is the level for the restaurant. The upper level will, or the most uppest point will be on top of this concrete core, a little bit higher. And you see the tower of the cathedral, the Giralda. And just to give you an example how this project, you know, gets calculated, about 2 million visitors a year pay each one 2 euros to go up and down that tower. So that makes already 4 million every year just by walking up and down. Something similar then becomes part of the calculation, for example, for this project. So the panoramic walk and the restaurant had to be attractive enough to have people also come up and spend money on that project. Then it's also quite, I mean, I think it's still fascinating that a city like Seville would allow a structure like this close to a really important Renaissance church, for example. And although sometimes I think, you know, why did we win this competition, you know, and why do we have to build this? I go there and I'm amazed that actually somebody really takes it serious and builds this, because in Germany this would never happen. You know, it would take 10 years discussions. It would, I mean, in the center of, I don't know, Freiburg, Regensburg, Munich, I could not see a project like this at all. Maybe on a fairground somewhere, you know, in an industrial area. So it's a culture that I think I have so much respect for, their curiosity and their encouragement. And although, you know, it's a completely different culture. And in Germany we have this saying, "Das kommt mir Spanisch vor." Like, it's a little bit strange, and actually it is quite Spanish when you go there. But I think only under these circumstances this kind of innovation really can happen. Now something is happening here. Okay, so what we see now is the first pieces of wood coming to the construction site. We have these maintenance stairs inside. The first 2 footprints are going up. Again, scale changes between parasol and houses. This is the swelling of the ground. So this becomes the roof now to the food market, which is on the ground level. We need to have concrete and metal covers in the first 5 meters because of fire issues. So that's where we have a more solid construction, and then the wood structure happens. And then of course they have these pictures, so there's this kind of before, after, or like this is now and this hopefully will be the future condition. And you see some of the pieces already going up. This is the panoramic walk on top, a view from the restaurant onto the city landscape, the horizon line of Seville. I think this is a picture that shows quite well the simultaneity of history, presence, and some kind of a vision. You see down into the archaeology. You have this ground floor of everyday life, and then of course these parasols that elevate you up onto a horizon line. Then it will become a special place, hopefully, also for events. Again, the different levels and the different pockets that are created through this intervention are important, I think, also for, let's say, the economic survival of that place. They could, let's say, close off the upper part and have a special, I don't know, flamenco festival, concert, a car presentation or something. At the same time, there will always be kind of public areas open and accessible. And it's a real gift to work in Seville or in Spain, because the public spaces are so lively and busy 24 hours a day. At 2 or 3 at night, sometimes more busy than at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So in a way, the city gives back a gift to their citizens in really celebrating a communal experience 24 hours a day. And then at special moments, it could even be as dramatic as this image, where it really becomes that one special attractor and pulsating heart of the city. So I think this is the last image, or maybe this one here. And this project really, I think, wraps up step-by-step developed in the last 10 years, from material research to thinking about encounters between the human body and technology, feedback and responses to, let's say, comfort, exposure, indiscretion, communication, forms of miscommunication even. So I think that project somehow culminated at this point, and again, if everything goes well, I think it should be open in about a year and 3 months or so. So thank you very much for coming. And